So today we're going to take a look at synthetic division utilizing complex numbers. So as we remember, complex numbers use the letter I because of the common concept that I is imaginary. So I stands for the square root of -1. Because we can't take the square root of negative numbers, we use that I to represent it. So got something you need to remember in your background. You should also remember that I squared is equal to -1. So if we're looking at this question, they want me to use the remainder theorem in synthetic division to find f of 2 plus I. So what synthetic division says is we're going to put what we're dividing by in a box. So that's what we're dividing by. When we use synthetic division, we're going to use the coefficients in order from least to greatest. So the coefficient of x squared is 1. The coefficient of -15x would be -15. And then we have the 1. So if you remember from synthetic division, you bring the first number down. So my first number is going to be 1. Then synthetic division says you take what's in the box and you multiply it by 1. So in this first instance, this multiplication isn't too bad. And then I'm going to add my numbers together. So that's going to give me -13 plus I. This is where we get that extra layer of complexity with complex numbers. I now have to take 2 plus 1 and multiply it by -13 plus I. I am going to have to use FOIL to do that. First, inner, outer, last. So my first times my first is -26. My outer is 2 times I. My inner would be -13I. And my last would be I squared. So as I said earlier, we have to remember I squared is -1. So when I combine my like terms, I'm going to get -27 minus 11I minus 1. Because I squared is -1, which becomes -27 minus 11I. Now we're not done. That's not an answer. I need to take that and put it in my synthetic division. And I'm going to do just like I did in the previous one. I'm going to add these terms together. So 1 plus -27 is -26. I have no like terms for the 11I, so I have to leave it alone. Now, we don't like to have negative coefficients for our whole numbers with complex numbers. That's a mathematical convention. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor a negative out of each parentheses because our convention is just that that whole number is going to be positive. That's the convention. So what the remainder theorem says is I had x squared here at the top. So this is plain old x. It becomes plain old x. Minus, this would be my number terms. There's no x by it. And this is my remainder right here. So 26 plus 11I. And when you have a remainder, you write it over 2 plus I. So this is the answer to that first piece for part A. Now, for part B, you're going to notice I'm not doing any extra work. For part B, you're going to utilize your remainder. So it's going to be what's on top. So that remainder is going to be nice and pretty there. And if you're running through the view and example on this, there are a couple of places that you may see something different than what I did as far as utilizing the box. So let me just kind of show you here. You see how they do the division symbol a little differently? That's the same thing I did with the box. They're still multiplying. You just don't have that nice, pretty arrow system that I utilize. I like to use those arrows a lot. So if you look at what I did, I have those arrows pointed, and that's just why I like this method, is so I can use those arrows to help me remember when I'm adding things or when I'm multiplying things. Now, when you're answering the f of 2 plus I, they're not forcing you to factor out that negative, because if I put this in the math lab, it would be like, what's happening, right? That's mathematically correct, but the lab isn't going to know what to do with that parentheses as the f of 2 plus 1. So what I'm going to do is distribute that negative And that's what the math lab is going to want to see. Just because it's kind of awkward with those parentheses, it's a computer, and so it's trying to make that a point or something else. It's not understanding you factored out a negative. So for the second part, you would enter that. So I hope that's been helpful to you with synthetic division. It's a great review, and it does have that extra layer of using FOIL. So make sure you're doing your first, inner, outer, last.